And that 1% actually means 4.6 million people. That's 4.6 million Filipinos in the US population. So what does that mean for nurses? How many nurses do we have in the population? 4.7. So in conclusion, every Filipino in the United States is a nurse. Thank you. You can buy my book later. So what you can kind of see is that 1898 is at the top. President McKinley ushered in a time of benevolent assimilation, which is kind of a nice way to be like the Borg. But I think the point about that is that they emphasized learning English. They developed norms and standards for business and the way things happen, and of course the procedures in the hospital. So that's what really started there. And then 1906 was when the first U.S. missionary doctors opened hospitals here in the U.S. You can see there's the war later, there's the baby boomers, and Medicare begins in 1965, and all on the other side are ways to get more Filipino nurses that have come through the legislation. The one in 1965, Ginger mentioned, is the one that a lot of people came over on. There were quotas on how many Asians could come in, so they abolished that, and they focused more on the profession and your relatives. So the relatives could come over as well. I know my relatives, a lot of my relatives came over on that piece of it. So here's my mom. She's on the right. This is her graduating from the University of the Philippines in their nursing program. She was graduated second with a degree, meaning that my auntie who was before her, there was no degree. And now the university started to offer degrees in nursing. Let me show you this little stat here. So nursing schools in the Philippines, 1940, there were 17. 2005, you can see there are 429. And then 2023, 1,282. So in the last 20 years, there's been an amazing growth. So, again, structurally, we have things, building blocks for why there are so many Filipinos here in the United States. You can see the phenomenon, what many will call a stereotype, has historic infrastructure that involves global power and the extraction and manipulation of resources. All right, let's get to the storytelling.
Sa buhay ko labis ang harap at pasakit ng pusong umibig, mandiwala ng langit at ng lumigaya, hinanga mo sa dusa, tanging ikaw sinta ang aking pag-asa. Dahil sa'yo nais kong mabuhay, dahil sa'yo hanggang mamatay. Dapat mong tatuin na walang igang gilo, puso ko danunin, ikaw ang ikawin. Dahil sa'yo ako lumigaya, pagmamahal ay alayan ka. Kung tunay man ako ay alipinin mo, ang lahat sa buhay ko dahil sa iyo. Because of you, there's a joy in living, and all my love I will offer you. Kung tunay man ako ay alipinin mo, ang lahat sa buhay ko dahil sa'yo. Kung Ngayon man ako ay alipinin mo ang lahat sa buhay ko dahil sa'yo. Dahil sa'yo.
Remy's experience would be far different from her younger sisters. She had to endure endless nights of caring for patients in the basement of the hospital. Her life was one of endless days of changing dressings, watching for infection, and ignoring the slow toll of hunger. When the liberation of Manila began in April 1945, the fighting got so intense the Japanese moved half the staff and most of the recovering patients to a new location. During the 5-block walk to an empty school, Remy saw bodies in the street. Many of the emaciated people had probably died from hunger, but others were mutilated by mortar shells or pierced with clean, round bullet holes. Still, others, Filipino men and women, 4 or 5 of them, had been brutally stabbed, obviously murdered, for some unknown reason. The hospital staff settled quickly into the new location. As the shelling got closer, the wounded came pouring in. Remy would clean and bind wounds using anything she could find. Torn sheets, sometimes coconut fronds or newspaper. Water was precious. Blood and the stench of it became unavoidable and accepted. Then, sometime during the continuous flow of carnage and misery, she realized the Japanese guards were no longer at their posts. Another nurse said the soldier on their floor had been missing for hours. They kept working. Then, like a clumsy, cranking herald of angels, tanks rumbled in the streets outside, shaking the room's few remaining glass jars of antiseptic. Cheers flowed in from the windows. "They're here!" someone cried. "The Americans are here!" Remy smiled down at an aging Filipino man, his head bandaged with a torn bedsheet. His parched lips were speechless. From a milky eye, a large tear fell. Over the years and then endless days of leading up to MacArthur's actual return, a palpable hatred for the Japanese grew with Remy, and at the same time, a new exhilarating bond with the Americans arose. Eventually, the nurses would start to disappear. They left to look for loved ones, with most of them never returning. Remy stayed until the Americans turned the building into their new field base. They quickly set up a perimeter and made camp. Though the work continued, the despair slowly crumbled. In the days that followed, she would line up with other Filipinos behind a gigantic supply truck covered in army green canvas. That gorgeous truck was filled with fresh supplies and would pull in daily just outside of her makeshift hospital. She would eagerly attack her cans of rations, the contents looking like pulled lechon or pork, but saltier. She would have soldiers open the tins with their army knives before she slipped back into the doorway. In time, she felt her strength returning. Along with it came a desire for news about Lunding. Her stupid brother Rolly, Luz, Nanay and Tatay, and of course, the baby girl Thelma. The second week after the arrival of the Americans, Remy snuck back in line for an extra tin of rations. She also managed to sweet-talk a soldier into giving her a couple of plantains and a chocolate bar. Then, on a random morning, just before sunrise, she stowed her supplies in a pillowcase and slinked unseen into the dusty street. Remy had mentally positioned herself facing north. She knew eventually that she would see the rising hills where her family would be, but she expected the chaos of rubble and decimated buildings to confuse her. Along the way, ragged people would see her with her small pillowcase and beg for food, an old man, then another, a woman with a burn mark on her cheek, sometimes a child, but she wouldn't give in. She didn't know what she would find when she reached her family, or if she needed something to barter to get them. She climbed over what was once a thick stone barrier in front of Intramuros, the walled city. But by then, no answer. "Igno!" she said louder. She melted onto the doorstep of the tiny home, leaning her head against the doorway. The sun on that late afternoon was particularly hot, and her skin baked. She waved off a fly that buzzed around her hair. In the still of that moment, she heard a faint drip, then another, and like notes plinking on a tiny piano, another and another. She pulled herself up toward the sound, and on the other side of the house, a wooden bucket placed under a bamboo gutter allowed a steady drip of the morning's rain to gather. To Remy, it was a vast pool. She cupped her hands and brought what felt like clean air to her lips. She breathed and breathed, drawing the freshness in, scooping up mouthfuls after mouthful of rainwater in what grew into a mad, desperate ecstasy. "Shh, girl, you don't steal," said an abrupt voice. Remy looked up. A hooded shadow stood over her, a rice hat covering his face. As his head tilted up, she could see his eyes. It was the old man, Igno. She blurted out his name and started to stand up. His stern expression gave way to recognition as he helped the poor girl onto her feet. He knew this girl, this skinny young woman, Agida's middle child. Yes, of course. "You remember me, yes?" Remy said. "Of course, dear one," the farmer said. "But you're all grown up, so tall now." "But yes, I remember your face. You look like your mother." Remy barely noticed the rope that the farmer held tightly in his hand until from around the corner stepped a carabao. Its horns were thick and wide, narrowing at the tips. Like the old man, the animal was also frail, no doubt having survived on the shrinking patches of grass not trampled by tanks and the boots of Japanese soldiers. It snorted, and a spatter of water from its nostrils wet Remy's face. She laughed, wiping her cheek with joy and relief. That day, Luz remembered Nanai's frantic, happy screams. As Luz held Velma's little hand in hers, she watched her mother, in coconut frond woven slippers, trotting down the dirt road toward the hill. When Luz looked to the horizon, she saw her sister, Remy, seated atop a mighty horned beast, slowly coming down the path. Igno, in his rice hat, led the one carabao parade, carrying Remy on her last mile home. The exhausted nurse slid down off the dark animal into the arms of her grateful mother, wailing, "Thanks to the Lord! Our Father, who had undoubtedly heard our deepest prayers." With little Thelma in tow, Luz walked closer. She saw how small Remy had gotten. Luz thought her sister had put on an oversized shirt, but it was the nurse's uniform she had washed, rewashed, and put on day after day for the eternity of the occupation. When Remy saw the girls, she dropped to her knees, holding out her arms. Luz ran to embrace. As Remy squeezed the now towering lanky teen Luz, tiny Thelma stumbled into the huddle of sisters, and they were together again. For that sliver of time, forgot their fear.
Farmerette in a social event at Camp Quezon, a Filipino-only camp. Filipinos in Guam at the time were still subject to segregation rules like in the US. People were separated by race and gender. But it was organized and clean. That's what Remy remembers. My mom, Luz, would come over to Guam when my Auntie Remy saw an opening for her at the Guam Memorial Hospital. My mom would meet my dad, who was an engineer, brought over by the US government initially. By the way, the sequel to the nurses will be the engineers. Because the guys, they were all engineers. He would rise in rank at a private construction company, and my mom and dad, both breadwinners, would become a power couple. You can see my mom's wedding dress in the 1950s. It's a June cleaver dress, white lace. The big movies were Rear Window, Giant, The Ten Commandments. The big songs were Hound Dog, All I Have to Do Is Dream, that's our song, Que Sera Sera. My parents' lives reflected the prosperity of the 1950s, and around them grew a family of fellow laborers, engineers, and nurses. Into that community would eventually come young Velma and her classmate Lily. Velma, if you can recall the image of the three sisters, she was the baby, she was the youngest. And in 1966, she and Lily were newly graduated from nursing school and brought to work at Guam Memorial. On the weekends, they were the new girls, fresh-faced, unmarried, young. So every weekend, there was an excuse for a party at the house to show off the girls. By then, the big movies were To Kill a Mockingbird, Bonnie and Clyde, Dr. Strangelove. The hits were Stop in the Name of Love, I'm a Believer, Can't Help Falling in Love with You. TV shows were Bonanza, Andy Griffith's Show, and I Dream of Jeannie.
Tiny bubbles in the wine make me happy, make me feel fine. Tiny bubbles make me warm all over, with the feeling that I'm gonna love you till the end of time. Now repeat after me. Tiny bubbles,
Tiny bubbles
in the wine,
in the wine,
make me happy,
make me happy,
make me feel fine.
make me feel fine.
Tiny bubbles,
Tiny bubbles
make me warm all over, with the feeling that I'm gonna love you till the end of time. Now I'll repeat after you.
Tiny bubbles
Holy,
in the wine,
ikaw ina,
make me happy,
oh hallelujah,
make me feel fine.
ikaw ang new. Tiny bubbles make me warm all over, with the feeling that I'm gonna love you till the end of time. With the feeling that I'm gonna love you till the end of time.
And the ability to either play the piano or sing seemed to be an integral part of the women's lives. One school night, I was in the kitchen, writing a paper with a pencil on notepad, drafting it before I started to type out the final report. I palmed a small bottle of whiteout in my left hand, rolling it with my fingers like a gunslinger, ready to draw once I moved to the typewriter. But an hour in, I heard singing coming from the hallway. Where do I begin to tell the story of how great a love can be? Sang the voice, flowing like a secret from the front of the house. The sweet love story that is older than the sea. I stepped into the dimly lit hallway and saw that the skinny white phone cord was leading down the stairs. "You fill my heart," she sang, hitting the climactic high note. "You fill my soul with my It was Zenny, singing in the darkened staircase to her distant lover. That was the first night I would hear her sing. It wouldn't be the last by far. Now these calls would go on for hours, night after night, song after song, and she would be on the phone so long, in fact, that 1 month bill was $900. Lola disconnected the phone, saying it would stay shut down until the woman could come up with the money to pay off the debt. Now, was this man worth it? He was certainly handsome. I remember the first night I met him. The school term had ended and I had just come home from my final last exam. Now, Auntie Thelma and Lily thought I should celebrate, so I dressed up for one of the house parties. I even had a small glass of champagne. When the piano playing started, Lily and Auntie Thelma had planned a special dance. Now, they each had sheer scarves and began dancing to the theme song of the TV show, I Dream of Jeannie. They were giggling the whole way through, putting their scarves across their face and letting their eyes cast seductive gazes. Now, during the dance, Zenny came into the room with her boyfriend in tow. I remember catching my breath when I first saw this strapping young Filipino. He was wearing a colorful long-sleeve shirt, a brave choice of dress for the normally staid, formal Filipinos who had been to the house. I remember him being tall and suave. Their entrance brought the room to a loud shriek, with Zenny parading her bow baritone into the middle of the room. She formally introduced him to the group in Tagalog. Now, later in the night, Zenny gathered up several scarves with a seductive song on the piano, and she started to do her own interpretation of the Dance of the Seven Veils, with each scarf eventually dropping on the lap of her bow.